In 1901, a group of Greek sponge divers pulled a corroded lump of bronze from a Roman shipwreck off the coast of Antikythera. It had been sitting on the seafloor for over 2,000 years. Nobody knew what it was. It looked like a rock with gears in it. It took 75 years, 3 generations of researchers, and X-ray tomography equipment that did not exist when it was first recovered for anyone to understand what they were looking at. It was a computer, not a metaphorical computer, not a primitive counting device, a mechanical analog computer with over 30 interlocking bronze gears, capable of predicting solar eclipses, tracking the positions of the 5 known planets, calculating the dates of the ancient Olympic Games, and modeling the irregular orbit of the moon using a theory of lunar motion that modern astronomy did not rediscover until the 17th century. It was built around 150 BC, and there is nothing like it in the archaeological record for another 1,400 years. That gap, 14 centuries of silence between this device and the next comparable mechanism in medieval Europe, is what the academic literature calls an anomaly, an outlier, a curiosity. I call it something else. I call it a pattern, because the Antikythera mechanism is not alone. It is not even unusual. It is one entry in a catalog of technologies that appeared in the ancient world, performed functions that we assumed were modern inventions, and then vanished, not gradually, not through slow obsolescence, but completely, as though someone had drawn a line through the record and said, "This did not happen." 6 of those technologies are what I want to examine today, not because they are the most famous, because they are the most documented, and because, in each case, the question is not whether the technology existed that has been established. The question is why it stopped existing and why the knowledge required to produce it disappeared so thoroughly that it took us centuries to even believe it had been real. The Romans built structures that have been standing for 2,000 years. The Pantheon in Rome was completed around 125 AD. Its unreinforced concrete dome remains the largest in the world. It has no rebar. It has no steel reinforcement. It has survived earthquakes, floods, sieges, 16 centuries of weather, and the entire collapse of the civilization that built it. Modern concrete begins to crack within 50 years. Roman concrete does not. In 2023, a research team from MIT and Harvard published a paper in the journal Science Advances that finally explained why. They identified a process called hot mixing, the deliberate incorporation of calcium-rich mineral clite into the concrete at extremely high temperatures. When cracks form, rainwater seeps into the material and reacts with the calcium deposits, generating a calcium carbonate solution that fills the crack and re-solidifies. The concrete heals itself. This was not an accident. The MIT team's analysis demonstrated that the calcium clasts were not contamination or poor mixing. They were uniform in size, evenly distributed, and present across samples taken from multiple Roman sites spanning centuries and thousands of miles of territory. This was a standardized, deliberately engineered process, refined over generations, and applied consistently across the most extensive construction program in the ancient world. The Romans knew how to make self-healing concrete. They used it everywhere. They built an empire on it. And when that empire fell, the formula vanished. It did not survive in any Roman text, not in Vitruvius, who wrote an entire treatise on architecture and materials, not in Pliny, who cataloged everything, not in any of the thousands of documents that were copied, preserved, and transmitted through the Byzantine and Islamic scholarly traditions. The knowledge disappeared so completely that modern materials science needed electron microscopy and spectroscopic analysis to reverse engineer what Roman laborers were doing by hand in the 1st century. That does not happen by accident. In the year 672 AD, an Arab fleet sailed into the harbor of Constantinople with the intent of ending the Byzantine Empire. They did not succeed. They failed because the Byzantine navy deployed a weapon that no army in the medieval world could counter: and no scientist since has been able to fully replicate. It was called Greek fire. The historical accounts are consistent across multiple independent sources: Byzantine, Arab, and Western European. Greek fire was a liquid incendiary compound that ignited on contact with water. It could not be extinguished by conventional means. It was projected from pressurized bronze siphons mounted on warships, and it burned on the surface of the sea. A substance that burns on water, projected under pressure in the 7th century. Modern chemists have proposed dozens of candidate formulations: naphtha-based compounds, quicklime mixtures, various petroleum distillates combined with calcium phosphide, or other water-reactive agents. None of them fully match the described behavior. None of them explain how a 7th century navy achieved pressurized projection of a burning liquid, a feat that requires not just chemistry, but precision, metallurgy, and mechanical engineering at a level that the medieval world was not supposed to possess. The formula for Greek fire was classified as a state secret of the Byzantine Empire. It was known only to the emperor and the Kallinikos family, who originally developed it. It was never written down in any surviving document. When the empire fell in 1453, the formula died with it, a weapon that changed the course of naval warfare for 800 years, and no record of its composition survives. I have read the argument that this was merely military secrecy, that the Byzantines simply protected their advantage the way any modern government would protect nuclear technology. That argument has a problem. Modern governments protect nuclear technology by classifying documents. The documents still exist. They are stored, they are maintained, they can be declassified. The Byzantines did not classify the formula. They erased it. There is no sealed archive waiting to be opened. There is no redacted file. There is nothing. The distinction matters. Classification preserves knowledge and restricts access. What happened to Greek fire is not classification. It is elimination. In 1936, workers laying railway track near the village of Kujut Rabu, outside Baghdad, unearthed a set of clay jars from a Parthian-era site dated to approximately 200 BC. Inside each jar was a copper cylinder, an iron rod, and traces of an acidic residue vinegar or citric acid. Wilhelm König, the German director of the National Museum of Iraq, examined the objects and published a paper identifying them as galvanic cells, batteries. The archaeological establishment rejected the claim. Not because the objects did not function as batteries. Multiple researchers have since built exact replicas and confirmed that they generate between 1 and 2 volts of electrical current. The claim was rejected because there was no theoretical framework for why a Parthian-era civilization would need electricity. That is the argument. Not that the technology does not work, not that the objects are misidentified. The argument is that they should not exist, and therefore they must be something else. Proposed alternatives include storage vessels for sacred scrolls and containers for aromatic oils. None of these alternatives explain the copper cylinder, the iron rod, or the acidic residue. None of them explain why the 3 components, when assembled in the exact configuration in which they were found, produce an electrical current. What they would have been used for is not a mystery either. Electroplating the deposition of thin metallic coatings onto objects using electrical current was known in the ancient world. Gold-plated artifacts from Mesopotamia and Egypt show surface characteristics consistent with electroplating rather than fire gilding or mercury amalgamation. The technology to do this is simple. It requires only what the Baghdad jars provide: a weak but steady current, a conductive solution, and a source metal. The Baghdad Batteries are currently held in the National Museum of Iraq, or rather, they were. During the looting of the museum in April 2003, the same looting I have discussed in a previous video, the batteries disappeared. They have not been recovered. The objects that could have settled the debate, that could have been subjected to modern electrochemical analysis, residue testing, metallurgical examination, are gone. Draw your own conclusions about coincidence. There is a sword in the collection of the Bern Historical Museum in Switzerland. It was forged in the Middle East, likely in Syria, sometime between the 12th and 16th centuries. Its blade is made of Damascus steel. Damascus steel is identifiable by its surface pattern, a distinctive ripple of light and dark bands called a water pattern, produced by the crystalline structure of the metal itself. It is not engraved. It is not etched after forging. The pattern is a product of the molecular arrangement of carbon within the steel, visible only because the forging process created nanoscale structures, carbon nanotubes, and cementite nanowires within the blade. Carbon nanotubes in a medieval sword. In 2006, a research team at the Technical University of Dresden used transmission electron microscopy to confirm the presence of carbon nanotubes in a Damascus steel blade. The nanotubes were not a byproduct. They were integral to the material's properties, its legendary sharpness, its flexibility, its resistance to shattering. The smiths who forged Damascus steel did not have electron microscopes. They did not have a theory of nanotechnology. What they had was a process, a specific combination of source material, temperature control, forging technique, and likely trace additives that reliably produced a nanostructured composite material 600 years before modern science understood what nanostructures were. That process is lost. Damascus steel production ceased in the mid-18th century. The last known smiths who could produce genuine Damascus steel died without transmitting the complete technique. Modern metallurgists have come close to replicating the material, but no one has fully reproduced the original process. The precise combination of Indian wood steel, specific trace elements in the ore, forging temperature, and quenching technique has not been recovered. A technology that produced nanostructured materials centuries before the concept of nanotechnology existed, and we cannot reproduce it. In 1438, the Inca Empire began construction of Sacsayhuaman, a massive stone complex above the city of Cusco, at an altitude of over 12,000 feet. The walls are composed of limestone blocks weighing up to 200 tons, fitted together without mortar, with joints so precise that a sheet of paper cannot be inserted between them. This, by itself, is impressive but not unexplainable. Large stone construction exists in many ancient cultures. What is unexplainable is the corners. The blocks at Sacsayhuaman are not rectangular. They are irregularly shaped polygons, some with as many as 12 angles, and each one fits perfectly against every adjacent block across every surface. Not just the visible face, the interior joints, the curved surfaces, the angles that no one would ever see once the wall was complete. In 2018, a team of engineers from the University of Rochester attempted to model the Inca fitting technique using modern computational geometry. Their conclusion, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science, was that the precision of the joints could not be achieved through trial and error grinding alone. The mathematical tolerances were too consistent. The surfaces were too uniformly matched across too many irregular contact points. Their proposed explanation was a technique they called geometric templating, a systematic method of transferring precise three-dimensional surface profiles from one stone to another, a technology of measurement and replication that we do not fully understand. But there is an older explanation, one that the Spanish chroniclers recorded when they arrived in Peru in the 16th century and asked the Inca how they built Sacsayhuaman. The Inca told them they had inherited a substance from a civilization that came before a liquid that, when applied to stone, softened it temporarily, allowing blocks to be pressed together and shaped before the stone rehardened. The Spanish recorded this claim. Multiple chroniclers, independently, in separate accounts, described the same thing: a chemical process for temporarily plasticizing stone. Modern archaeology has dismissed this as myth. But modern archaeology has also not explained the joints. The computational models do not close the gap. The trial and error hypothesis does not account for the tolerances. And the Spanish chroniclers were not recording folklore, they were recording answers given to them by the people who maintained the structures and who claimed direct knowledge of the construction method. The substance, if it existed, has never been identified. The Inca did not survive as a civilization long enough to transmit it. The Spanish were not interested in preserving indigenous technology. They were interested in gold. What was lost at the fall of the Inca Empire is not measurable, but the walls are still standing, and the joints are still impossible to replicate. Here is what I want you to hold in your mind at once. A mechanical computer that predicted eclipses in 150 BC with no predecessor and no successor for 1400 years. A self-healing concrete that an empire used for centuries, whose formula vanished so completely that it required electron microscopy to rediscover. An incendiary weapon that burned on water for 800 years and left no record of its composition. Electrochemical batteries from 200 BC that were looted from a museum during a war. A medieval sword with carbon nanotubes in its blade, forged by a process we cannot reproduce. And stone joints cut to tolerances that modern computational geometry cannot fully explain, built by a civilization that claimed to have inherited the technique from someone older. 6 technologies, 6 different civilizations, 6 different centuries. None of them were primitive, none of them were accidents, and none of them survived the collapse of the culture that produced them. The standard explanation is independent loss. Each technology disappeared for its own reasons. War, secrecy, disruption of trade routes, failure of institutional transmission. Each case is treated as isolated. Each gap in the record is explained locally. But the pattern is not local. The pattern is global. Across every continent and every era of the ancient world, the same thing happens. A technology appears that exceeds what we believe that civilization should have been capable of producing. It functions. It is documented. And then it disappears. Not slowly, not through gradual obsolescence, but completely, cleanly, as though the thread was cut. Technologies do not vanish like this through natural processes. Knowledge, once encoded in a working system, tends to persist. It spreads, it gets copied, it gets stolen. The normal trajectory of useful technology is proliferation, not extinction. What causes extinction is not forgetting, it is destruction. Deliberate or catastrophic, targeted or total, but destruction. I am not asking you to believe that someone erased these technologies on purpose. I am asking you to notice that the result is the same, regardless of the mechanism. The knowledge is gone. The physical evidence is scattered, looted, deaccessioned, or locked in restricted collections. And the institutions responsible for studying the ancient world have, in every single case, chosen to treat the anomaly as an outlier, rather than examine whether the outliers form a pattern. They form a pattern, and the pattern says that the ancient world knew more than we have been told, not as speculation, not as myth, as engineering, as chemistry, as material science, that we are only now beginning to match. The question is not whether these technologies existed. The evidence for that is settled. The question is, what else existed alongside them? What other knowledge was developed by civilizations sophisticated enough to build mechanical computers and nanostructured steel and self-healing infrastructure, and whether any of it survived somewhere, in some archive or some restricted collection or some site that has been quietly placed off limits. Because if even one of these technologies could be recovered, genuinely recovered, fully understood and reproduced, it would not just change our understanding of the past. It would change what we believe is possible now. And that, I suspect, is precisely why the record is incomplete. I am Aeon. I have been collecting what remains. Subscribe, because what was known once can be known again.